Hey everyone, I hope you are having a productive day either. So, in this interesting presentation, we're gonna deal with some aspects that happened during the Cold War. Uh, we first gonna deal with the Red Scar, and we're gonna know what is it and when was it. So the first thing, the Red Scar was a period of hate and fear and paranoia of communist infiltration in the United States during the Cold War. It was characterized by widespread investigations and prosecutions of individuals suspected of being communists or, let's say, having communist ties, as well as the imposition of loyalty oaths and the blacklisting of suspected communists from employment in the entertainment industry and other fields.
So, in this part, I'm going to talk about three main ideas, which are first, the role of anti communism in the American history, second, the emergence of the Red Scare in the aftermath, World War II, and last, the various phases of the Red Scare and their specific characteristics. Anti-communism has played a significant role in the American history, particularly during the Cold War. So, the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in a global struggle for power and influence, and the US viewed communism as a threat to its way of life and national security. As a result, the government and various organizations actively worked to oppose the spread of communism both domestically and internationally. This included measures such as the Red Scare of the 1950s, in which people suspected of being communist sympathizers were blacklisted, accused of un-American activities, and even imprisoned. Anti-communism also fueled military conflicts, such as the Vietnam War and the Korean War, as the US sought to prevent the spread of communist regimes in the Southeast Asia and the Korean Peninsula. And even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the legacy of anti-communism has continued to shape American foreign policy and domestic politics. The emergence of the Red Scare in the aftermath of World War II was a period of intense fear and paranoia in the US about the threat of communism. This fear was fueled by the actions of the Soviet Union, which was seen as a major rival to the US during the Cold War. During this time, many Americans were convinced that there were communists infiltrating the government and society, and there were widespread investigations and witch hunts to root out anyone suspected of being communist. The Red Scare had a significant impact on the American society, leading to the widespread blacklisting, discrimination, and persecution of those suspected of being communists or communist sympathizers. It also had a lasting impact on the political landscape of the United States, with many people becoming more conservative and supportive of anti communist policy. As it is known, the first Red Scare occurred in the United States in the late 1940s and 1950s and was characterized by widespread fear of communist infiltration in American society, government, and businesses. This fear was fueled by the perceived threat of the Soviet Union and the reality of espionage by Soviet agents in the United States. In response to this fear, the government led by Senator Joseph McCarthy launched investigations and hearings to root out alleged communists in the government, military, and other institutions. This period is known also for the blacklisting of individuals accused of being communists, as well as the widespread loss of jobs and social ostracism of those accused. Whereas the second Red Scare occurred in the 1970s and was sparked by the perception of a growing threat from communist countries, particularly China and Vietnam, as well as domestic terrorism by groups such as the Weather Underground. This period was characterized by focus on national security and continuation of the investigation and persecution of alleged communist sympathizers.
Hey again, so let's carry on with the cultural impact of the Red Scar. Let's first start with the Hollywood blacklist and entertainment industry. The first thing, the official blacklist was during the Communist scar in the 1950s. So what happened exactly is that studios agreed to not use certain actors and writers who were suspected of being Soviet agents, such as we have Herbert Biberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, and we have also Ring Lardner and many other well-known actors. So studios were afraid that Congress would step in if they did not regulate themselves. We have also Charlie Chaplin, he's a well-known actor. He was also suspected to be a communist agent. We have also the entertainment industry. Why Hollywood is called like that and how it became like that. So the first thing, the businessman Herbert Johnstone Whiteley, he transformed Hollywood into a wealthy and popular residential area. It became incorporated into Los Angeles in 1910. It became also a home to many famous television and movie studio and record companies. It continued to thrive well into the Great Depression and World War II. So the movies offered cheap escape from reality. Even the directors themselves increasingly reflected the American culture and politics. And some wonderful movies that time pushed the boundaries of what a film could be. At that time, in particular in 1946, which is the golden age of Hollywood, 80 and 90 million people went to the movies every week. That was about 60% of the entire US population at that time. All right, now let's see the impact of the Red Scar on literature and art in general. So the first thing when we talk about the impact, we talk about the Republican representative from Michigan, who is trained as a lawyer with no background in art or art criticism, Don Darrow. In various speeches, he described them, I mean those who were suspected to be Soviet agents. Not only they weren't only actors, there were also some artists. He described them as human termites and international art thugs. In one of his speeches, he said, "Modern art is communistic because it is not distorted and ugly, because it does not glorify our beautiful country, our cheerful and smiling people, and our material progress. Art which does not glorify our beautiful country in plain, simple terms that everyone can understand breeds dissatisfaction. It is therefore opposed to our government, and those who create and promote it are our enemy." That's what he said in one of his speeches. And as an example of European artists who had imposed their anti American ideas on American artists. He named, among many others, Picasso, who had publicity acknowledged his communist leanings, Bark, Legar, Duchamp, who were a well-known painter and writer, and we have many others, all of whom he claimed were active weapons of the Kremlin. Many enlightened art after it editors, many enlightened art editors and museum directors published objection to Dondero attacks. So during this period, the American literature jumped from the age of disillusionment to what is called the age of anxiety. A large number of literary and cinematic works in America dramatized the key issues of the conflict during the Cold War years. These narratives initially featured spies, evil CIA agents, and anti-communist themes. The unimaginable became imaginable through nuclear exchange scenarios and many other scenarios. In later years, Cold War cinema and fiction became more nuanced and addressed a wider range of themes, tackling such issues as American militarism and institutional corruption, and sometimes through satire. In the final years of the Cold War, the imaginative literature of the period tended to reflect America's own growing sense of a triumph. And the last thing to talk about in this part is the role of media in shaping public perception of communism and anti-communism. So, media and propaganda techniques were strongly used as a direct tool against the enemy. There was a direct contribution of the media to the war effort, which saw the media engaging in antagonistic psychological warfare. This was achieved by disambling propaganda into the Soviet Union via the radio as let's say an attempt to spread pro-capitalistic sentiment into the Soviet population and create a more pro-Western culture. The same thing for the Soviet media. They also used the medium of the radio within its own state and other countries as a form of, uh, uh, let's say, uh, transnational propaganda, because the Soviet media was state censored. So these propagandas in war, the media usually plays the role of persuading and supporting the target masses into fighting the opponents or spread peace. And this is a clear example of anti-American propaganda. It is no to chemical weapons. We all know that the Russians as well have chemical weapons and more military number, but this is what usually the propaganda do. It carries a lot of exaggeration. It is just to persuade the others and control their minds.
The Red Scare was a period of heightened fear and suspicion of communists in the United States during 1950s. It had significant political consequences, including the blacklisting of alleged communists in the entertainment industry and the investigation of suspected communist ties by the House of Un-American Activities Committee. The Red Scare also led to the passage of the Internal Security Act of 1950, which required federal employees to swear loyalty oaths and established detention facilities for the incarceration of suspected subversives. The Red Scare contributed to a general atmosphere of McCarthyism and paranoia during this time period. Talking about McCarthyism era, it's named after Senator Joseph McCarthy. Was a time of intense political polarization and widespread fear of communism in the United States during the 1950s. McCarthy led a campaign to expose and root out alleged communists in the federal government, the military, and other institutions. This campaign had a significant impact on Congress and the executive branch, as many government officials were accused of being communists and faced investigation and public scrutiny. The McCarthy era also had a chilling effect on freedom of speech and association, as people were afraid to express their political beliefs or association with certain individuals for fear of being labeled as communists. This period is now seen as a low point in American history, as the fear and paranoia of the time led to the suppression of civil liberties and the blacklisting of many innocent people. On the other hand, it had a significant impact on foreign policy decisions, as the government became increasingly focused on combating the perceived threat of communism. Many foreign policy decisions were made with the goal of containing the spread of communism and protecting the country from its perceived dangers. This included supporting anti-communist regimes and governments, engaging in proxy wars, and enacting legislation such as the McCarran Internal Security Act. The Red Scare also influenced domestic policy, as many people were accused of being communist sympathizers and lost their jobs or were blacklisted. Overall, the Red Scare was a major event in American history that had a lasting impact on the country's culture and politics during the Cold War. It's a topic that could be explored in greater depth in a dissertation on American culture and politics during this period.